We are here to talk about scaling issues with Taz Lake, founder at Brightmill. Tagline is Better Websites Through Analysis. He's been a founder for quite a while. And we've been having a little chat back and forth here about what happens after you scale and you've got this perception that you're successful and everything's going great, and then bam, something horrible happens. And we've seen this with companies like Equifax, Panera Bread, even Amazon is not, they don't get a get out of jail free card here. Taz, thank you for being on.
Thanks for having me.
We're going to dig into this a little bit about these, what you call bad experience triggers, right? And I really like this because we get into a situation. I mean, the first question I have is how fast can this sort of thing happen where you've had some initial success, you're kind of flushed with it, and maybe a teeny bit full of yourself, and because nobody would ever be like that, right? And you're moving along, and suddenly, whammy, one of these awful things happen. And how fast can that happen? Is it just mature companies who are sitting out there 10 years in, and then suddenly they realize stuff's out of date, or can it happen much faster?
Well, it can happen a lot faster, but I think the point is no one is immune to it. I think that as we become more and more dependent on web, digital, mobile, as customer experience has become more important as a strategic differentiator in businesses of all sizes, you're starting to have a lot more complexity in your web and digital space. A lot of times that complexity has been isolated, let's say within the IT team, and they've been the ones taking care of your technology over the last 20 years. But with the rise of these newer technologies and diverse cloud environments, that user experience and customer experience are coming closer and closer together. When you think about some of these larger companies you mentioned at the top, where they're depending on it for really mission critical activities, order management, customer data, some of these real critical things, a lot of the times that it's been, kind of spiraled out of control has been because of lack of technology being monitored and upgraded properly, or some other major gap that's either that can be identified pretty quickly given the appropriate level of attention, but they've kind of put it on the back burner. They'll I don't know what the internal conversations are, but hey, we're successful, and quite honestly, it's hard to look at everything at once, and so certain things get put on the back burner and fall to the wayside, and then you end up having these major issues.
Well, this is why smart executives hire companies like yours and mine. Mine is a more general, process-oriented, organization-wide analysis for these kinds of problems where the strengths and weaknesses and whatnot. And you're really focusing on the website.
That's right. We're focusing on web, pretty much any online, if you want to think about it as a portal or intranet or extranet or whatever you're calling it, where your customers and quite honestly your internal employees are, how they're interacting with you and how that experience looks and how secure it is and how performant it is and how up to date it is.
And we've seen companies who are maybe using a distribution channel to sell whatever it is that they make or do somewhere else, right? What does that tend to lead to as far as their own website?
Yeah, so I mentioned complexity. The third-party solutions that are integrated into the website are numerous. If you take a look at some tools that are out there where you can analyze what's the technographics, if you will, what makes up the website, you'll see most of them are using 30, 40, 50 third-party tools and scripts, some of them hundreds, and so that can really impact the speed and performance of your site. It can impact quality of your site because you have to make sure all those things are working correctly and interacting correctly together. One example just from my experience yesterday, a major a major online newspaper trying to use one of their key pieces of functionality. They even sent it out, to my email inbox. I click through, and then I get to their page and it doesn't work. And the reason, me being me, I go look at the console, and sure enough, there's JavaScript errors that are preventing it from being from behaving in the browser of my choice, which at this time is Google Chrome. So I had to switch over to Microsoft Edge and look at it on Edge. So actually something worked on Edge and didn't work on Chrome, which is, if you're in my circle, you know how funny that is.
Yeah.
So, no one's really immune to it. And, a big part of that and solving for that is really having a process in place to monitor, improve, add issues to your backlog, and just make it part of that continuous improvement of your customer experience.
Yeah, you can't let sleeping dogs lie. Just because something horrible hasn't happened yet to this very moment doesn't mean that it's not about to. Let's look at a couple of these stories that of the bigger companies that you've shared with me in notes. Panera Bread.
Yeah.
We talked about security signals that their data might not be safe. Tell us what happened there.
Yeah, there's plenty of articles on it that are very detailed. The summary is basically this, and I encounter this a lot when I try to, kind of do good work with folks and kind of out of the goodness of my heart tell them, hey, this is broke, or this is wrong with your site. There was a security researcher that actually approached them and told them their API, which is an application programming interface that allows them to kind of share data between their systems, that API was compromisable. In other words, it was easy to get to, and that people could, skilled people could get to that API and actually get customer data off the website. And that includes personally identifiable information, which is called PII, or I think they even had last four of the credit card available through this API, and kind of in the wide open. And he approached it via responsible disclosure, went to the folks at Panera Bread and they pretty much ignored him and said, he was just a security researcher trying to sell his services. They ignored him. And so this went on, I think, for a couple of months, and then finally he just said, "I've got to tell the world, you can't just do this."
Right. We all love integrations,
right?
But the more you pile on, the more risk you're taking.
That's right.
You remember Target from a few years ago? They had their data breach. Equifax certainly had their data breach. I was one of the victims of that.
Yeah, I think we all were. I think Equifax is a quite an interesting story because it had to do with something called Apache Struts was not up to date. And because Apache Struts was not up to date, a well-known vulnerability was still present, and it was able to be compromised. So just keeping technology up to date. I mean, if that's your baseline, if nothing else is taken away, from today's discussion, that's really what it's about, is be ruthless about upgrading your technology. And I've been in the enterprise. I know the complexities of that, and so I'm not speaking out of turn. Hopefully, I know that it's difficult, and I know it takes time, energy, effort. A lot of times there is no upgrade path. Sometimes you have to buy new. Sometimes you have to rebuild completely, and it's not a fun experience. But when you're looking at these things, if there's security and performance issues, which are two of the big ones that can really kill technology stacks, those need to be addressed.
Yeah, great point. Interesting there that we hear data breach or something, right? This was hacked. And I think on a populist level, the understanding of that is very thin, right? It's very surface level. Most people don't really dig down into, well, wait, what actually caused this thing? And as tech founders, who I hope are listening, you should have a bigger sense of responsibility about finding out what this stuff is, right? What actually caused it. You mentioned kind of the boy who cried wolf there, only he wasn't crying wolf with no reason, right? How can a founder discern? What are the signals to tell, okay, actually this is a real thing
Mm-hmm.
It's a true risk that I need to be paying attention to, and not just, as you said, somebody trying to push their services.
Yeah, it's difficult, and I understand. Especially being a founder myself, and trying to kind of discern. You and I have talked about this too, from the sales and business development side. How do you know what works, right? And how do you know when someone's actually offering something that's good versus something that's fluff? So for somebody like me, who is not a natural born sales person, or business development expert, um, that's difficult for me. Well, on the technology side, it can be just as difficult for someone who maybe isn't as savvy on the tech side. If they're
Mm-hmm.
tech founders, they might know a whole lot about a particular area, let's say ERP systems or something like
Mm-hmm.
that, and they understand the risks with that. Maybe they're not as tuned into uh, you know web or whatever other technologies are at risk in their organization. But I think when someone comes in and tells you something, or takes the time to tell you something kind of for free and out of the blue, you know, I'm sure that there's an offer on the back end. We get all the LinkedIn invites in the world.
Mm-hmm.
You accept, and then 2 days later, you've got an offer in your LinkedIn inbox,
Mm-hmm.
all automated most of the time. But if somebody takes that time to tell you or to report to you that something's wrong, it's worthwhile to listen and try to build trusted advisors, whether that's somebody like me or somebody that is tech savvy and can answer the questions. You got to have those advisors around you. You can't do it on your own. I mean, I don't know everything about I've got an MBA and I still don't know everything about finance and accounting and taxes. I still have CPAs and bookkeepers and all that. So, you do that already with your financial side. You need to do it with your tech side as well.
Right. So it's tempting to ignore unsolicited advice.
Mm-hmm.
However, when it's this specific,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, you probably ought to pay a little attention to it, dig into it a bit.
If somebody's really serious about it and really wants to look at it, I'll usually run a quick free analysis for them, and let them know what kind of the top 2 or 3 uh, things are. If we see anything major, obviously, if we see a security issue when we're looking at a site, their site's already compromised. That can lead to a whole variety of things, including search results being poisoned. It can lead to um, your visitors to your website actually getting malware on their computer because your website served it to them. you know all these, and then as soon as they start doing the research about where that came from, they're not going to like you very much. Those types of things. But if we ever see anything like that, it's just, hey, that's free advice. I'm not going to charge you for that. This is what's wrong.
Okay.
Get your and usually the response when I do that is something like, well, the IT team will fix it, or this or that. And that's not always the best response, because you're there for a reason. You're kind of in that situation for a reason. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm
Systemic problems.
yeah. And so there's the crux of the matter. I tell you that this is wrong, but honestly, I can't fix it for free, because it's going to take me hours to dig in, identify root cause, make sure it doesn't
Right.
happen again, fix the issues that have resulted from this being compromised. So it's not a free engagement. So unfortunately, it sounds like a sales pitch, when in fact I'm actually just trying to tell you, hey, there's a problem.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There is an education piece that needs to go along with this, even if the buyer company does have a tech team of their own,
Mm-hmm.
because clearly the tech team behaved in such a way that got them into this situation in the first place. And fixing it is the
Yeah.
equivalent of putting a Band-Aid on it. Yeah, it's going to work for a while,
Mm-hmm.
but then things are going to decay and you're going to end up in this similar problem situation down the
Yeah.
road.
Well, larger companies too, I mean, have their own technology teams, and a lot of them are great. Uh, but remember, technologists don't know everything.
Right.
Somebody comes over to me and says, well, go do this thing. Do you know this platform? It's like, I've never worked with it before in my life, but thousands have, and I don't know it. Well, that's not uncommon, because it's such a diverse
Mm-hmm.
industry. IT teams have their own interests as well, that they have to keep the lights on. They have to make sure the network's stable. there's a lot of stuff IT teams do that we don't see, and that's a huge burden, to be honest with you. And so when you come in and you say, well, now do this thing that's a little different, maybe a little bit, so when it's, let's say marketing comes in and says, well, there's all this marketing technology now that I need you to help me manage. IT teams are not always set up to deal with that. And so they'll try to map a requirement into existing technology that doesn't really fit what the requirement is. And it can be, some butting of heads going on there between marketing and IT, because marketing's not getting what they need, sales teams aren't getting what they need, and IT is just kind of, so busy they're just trying to keep the lights on and keep the company running.
Right.
Yeah.
So you have categorized areas of problems or issues that could potentially arise in a website or a platform, and that you call it the 7 forces framework.
Yeah.
Can we dig into that a little bit?
Yeah, we can. So, the 7 forces framework was really born out of me trying to find a way to bucket all the different issues that can happen with the web or web technology. And it comes out of 20 plus years of doing this. I built my first website in 1993. You probably didn't even know the web existed then.
I did, but
yeah. It was about the internet was about, or the World Wide Web was about 2 or 3 years old at that point.
Yeah. We had our 300 baud modems and then 1200 and whatnot, and that connecting to BBSs, and then it grew up out of that. No, I was a year out of high school in '93. To be fair, so
well, cool. Yeah, so we're kind of right there then. So, the 7 areas of knowledge and areas of focus, the 7 forces, if you will, would be security, speed and performance, marketing and content, quality, accessibility and compliance, usability, and technology. And so we talked a little bit already about security. Speed and performance is a really big one, especially for e-commerce sites that depend on a kind of that customer journey and flow to get through the buying process. You mentioned Amazon at the top of the hour, and every year Amazon Prime Day comes around, and every year it slows their website to a crawl, services fail, people get angry. It's been in my presentation now so long, I almost don't even say it anymore because it's such a well-known issue. And that's, Amazon's just had that massive success. Now are we really worried about Amazon? It's such a monster. But truly, how much did they lose on Amazon Prime Day? At one point, they were talking about billions lost for 1 second of slowdown in their website. So that's when you're looking at these massive volumes of transactions like Amazon has, speed can really, really impact the bottom line. But even smaller websites, let's say you're running a Shopify store and your revenue's, only $20,000 a month or something. Speed still matters. It still matters because people aren't real keen on waiting. Pretty much 2 or 3 seconds per page load is about all they want. Now, if you have a multi-step buying process, you can start to see if it's a 10-second load time, or it takes forever for the page to paint because you're using images that are too large, for example. You're really going to have an issue with them completing the buying process.
Makes sense. And I like where technology came in on that list. I'm fond of saying technology is glue, apply it last. And that's where it is on the list. It's not first where many people would put it.
That's right. And a lot of times when I talk about these 7 forces and I get to technology, people scratch their head and they say, haven't you been talking about technology all along? It's like, no, technology is that glue. It's the table stakes, right? That's what you have to have in place. So I'm going to talk about it last. It doesn't mean it's not important. It just means that it's kind of assumed that you're going to be looking at your technology and keeping it up to date. I like to say technology is not, like the Ronco guy where you just set it and forget it, right? Technology is something that needs active management.
let's look at something else. Legislative change. Things are changing in the legislative world that impact commercial websites. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, hopefully people don't get too upset when I say this, but as you know, lawyers are always out there looking around, looking to see what types of things are happening, and most of the time it's well intentioned. But what's happened recently is, and rightfully so, there are issues around what's called accessibility, and this is for folks who might have issues with either sight or hearing, um, where they have some type of other ability that doesn't allow them to use the website properly the way that it's designed or built. And there are certain legislation that has been passed for a long time now related to government websites and accessibility. Section 508 is the one that's most commonly cited, where government websites have to provide a level of accessibility to everyone, because obviously we all pay taxes, right? So we're paying taxes, and we need to get the services from the government through the digital channel equally. What's happened though is some of the e-commerce sites and some of the grocery sites and hotel websites and things of that nature people have started to try to apply accessibility standards to those websites, and then using those as a vector to have lawsuits against these companies because their website was not accessible, because you're essentially blocking access. It'd be the same as having steps in front of the Target store where you couldn't get your wheelchair up into the Target store. It's like a big sign that says "Go away," right? To anybody in a wheelchair. So the same thing with websites is, if I've got low vision and the biggest font on your site is 9 point or 10 point, there's a good chance I'm going to have a hard time if I can't hear, and a lot of your content's delivered with videos with no subtitles. You start to get the idea. So also, not everybody uses the same device. I mean, we know that, right? We know about web browsers, we know about mobile devices, but we don't know about necessarily things like screen readers or specialty devices for those with disabilities, so that they can actually consume the websites and the other digital content. And if sites aren't built a certain way, then it's not going to work on those devices, especially depending on what industry they're in. Correct. I mean, and there's most folks will have legal advisors, and they can go to them and kind of say, hey, am I in this category? And if so, then having accessibility testing and remediation certainly makes a lot of sense.
Okay, sounds good. One last question is about monitoring. People will put a monitoring tool on their site and think that they've done enough. What is the truth about that, and what should they be doing?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. There's monitoring. So when you're monitoring something, there are a variety of components to monitor. A common example that I bring up is a lot of people monitor whether or not the server is up or not, and they think if the server's up, everything's good. That's not really good enough, because there are different layers. I'm trying not to go too technical on the folks here. There are different layers, and one of the layers is that web application. Okay. And that web application functions completely separately from whether the server's up or down. It's thumbs up, thumbs down. And so there are gray areas about performance and monitoring. Another example would be things like the little green lock that you see on your web browser. What does that mean? Well, there's different technologies behind that can basically control the security around your site. Just because it's there doesn't necessarily mean everything is perfect.
Right.
And having it there is better than nothing, but there can be things like old ciphers. You might have heard some of the old attacks like Poodle, for example, where SSL is compromised, but it's only certain ciphers that are compromised. And so you have to make sure you actually monitor your SSL, make sure it's up to date, make sure it's not vulnerable to those types of attacks as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, there's a real popular analysis tool for websites. A lot of people, when I tell them I do web analysis, they're like, well, don't you just use a tool? And the short answer is we use a lot of tools and we use a lot of visual inspection. But, tools, techniques, scoring, but there's a real popular tool out there for testing websites, and the only thing it does is it tests to see whether SSL exists or not. If it does, it has a whole section called security, and it says, hey, you're good. That's laughable. that's ridiculous. That's like saying, oh, look, the lights are off in the house. No one must live there.
Right. Or the battery for my car is charged. It must be fully working.
That's right. It's like monitoring one very, very small piece and then saying, yep, everything's good.
All right. So folks can come to you for an analysis of their website, their online platform, and find out a far greater degree of detail. And
That's right. So, we're glad to help people with that and really help them roadmap out what's next if it's needed. There might just be very specific, tactical issues that could be resolved, but there could be, larger structural concerns as well that we can address, or, connect them with partners or whatever else, we would need to do to help them achieve the goals they want to achieve with their website. So,
well, my big takeaway is you don't know what you don't know until you talk to an expert. Our guest today has been Taz Lake, founder of Brightmill, Better Websites Through Analysis. Taz, how can people get a hold of you? Where should they go?
Yeah, the best way to get a hold of me is just through the website, brightmill.com. And there's a schedule link on that particular website, and then they can have direct access to my calendar and schedule some time if they want to chat about it. And if they don't like that way, they can always email me at taz@brightmill.com.
Excellent. Well, thanks for being our guest today.
Thanks for having me, Jason. Appreciate it.